Greetings, fellow internet wanderers. If you find yourself endlessly scrolling through the virtual realm seeking laughter, knowledge, heartwarming tales, or just the wildest of adventures, then you're in for an absolute treat. We've gathered the juiciest, funniest, and most fascinating content from YouTube's vast universe and channeled it all into one epic destination. Hit that subscribe button and don't forget to ring the notification bell. We promise you'll be hooked from the very first post. Story 1. Used to work at Walgreens in the photo department, and I was a huge stickler for not selling professionally done photos if they didn't have a release from the photographer. This one lady brought in a boudoir set that I'm certain nobody wanted to see, but they were clearly professional. I wouldn't sell them to her. Told her she could get a release from the photographer and come back. Immediately indignant, exclaimed, "I'll email him right now." She did. Few minutes later, she makes a phone call. Walk one aisle away from me to take it. Now is yelling at the guy saying he's messed her over and, "Why did you give me a CD with the pictures if I couldn't print them?" And then my favorite line, "No, you're cheap." I was losing it in the photo department. Goes on for a couple more minutes, then she storms over to me again and just goes, "Give me my pictures." "Ma'am, you clearly don't own the rights to these. I'm not going to sell them to you." "Go get your manager." I walk to the office and talk to my manager. Tell her everything. We laugh, but ultimately my manager was a pushover most of the time. Not this time. She walks out with me, and now we're both telling this lady off. She starts to accuse me of being a pervert who just wants to keep them for myself. Yeah, nah. But ultimately, the manager, just to get her out of the store, says that instead of them going in the bin with all of the other no sales to be counted in the morning and shredded, she'd shred them right then. Of course, this is the lady's only win for the day, so she takes the deal. She stayed there while my manager shredded them. These stories happen every deity damn day. I work at a casino now, and I saw far more scum of the earth trying to mess over professionals there at the job at Walgreens than I ever see at the casino. And curse any of you who ask why I care. Those people don't do photography for fun. It's their job. If you want prints done, either pay for them or pay for the rights to the digitals. And you photographers, if someone does have your permission to do as many reprints as they like, give them some kind of written or digital permission. That way, the person who prints those photos can say they saw the slip and are absolved of any responsibility brought about by reprinting. According to Walgreens policy, if the photographer found out the photos were reprinted, my store and I could each be responsible for damages to their income for having printed them. I'm surprised that she went through all this trouble. At this point, if she has the digital photos, this Karen would have probably just as easily bought a cheap printer and printed them out herself. I wonder what time frame this story was told, or what time this took place. Story 2. A little late, but here it goes. I was working a back drive at a fast food joint years ago. An older Karen came driving in to give her order. Now, this location doesn't have a speaker due to a neighborhood ordinance, so all the orders in drive-thru are taken face-to-face. She orders a double cheeseburger without onions, and I ring it in, complete her order, and send her on her way. About 5 minutes after she's picked up her food, she comes back through the drive-thru and says, "They put onions on my burger." I apologize, print her up a duplicate receipt to confirm to her and myself that I rang it in without onions. I then tell her that if she goes up to the front window and tells the manager who's working up front that they'll replace the burger for free made correctly, but that I can't do anything about it back here. She does so, and they give her a brand new burger and an apology. I thought that was the end of the situation. But boy, was I wrong. Karen called the state government on me by name, demanding I be fired. If I recall correctly, I was told that she called the Food Safety Department, the Chamber of Commerce, and the government's office, and the governor's office. The franchise owner called to say that it turned out that Karen is allergic to onions, and she straight up accused me of deliberately ringing her sandwich in wrong and tried to poison her, then printing up a false duplicate receipt of her order to make her look like a liar. Keep in mind that I read the receipt back to her and she confirmed it was her order. I didn't get along with the manager who was working at the time, but even he was like, "That's complete hogwash." It wasn't even his mistake. It was the kitchen's, and we fixed it for her. The franchise owner was told by whichever branch of the state government called that Karen had demanded that I be fired. I wasn't. I wasn't even written up, but I did stop wearing my name tag at work when I could get away with it. Too long didn't read. Got the state government called on me by Karen because the kitchen messed up an order which got replaced free of charge. Could have been fired for a mistake that wasn't even mine. Even if the kitchen messed up. Even if somehow this person got the order wrong. If you're allergic to something, wouldn't you check your food ahead of time to make sure that that thing that could possibly unalive you wasn't on there? Maybe this is just an exercise in maybe taking just a little bit of personal responsibility to stay breathing? Story 3. Picture this. You're a teenager working in a grocery store in late hours closing up the meat department. Your job is to clean the place and occasionally help a customer with some of the pre-prepared meats and find what aisle has what. The time is now 8:30 p.m. The store is dead quiet, and you're wrapping up your cleaning work in shift, just making sure everything is shiny and chrome, and rinsing off the last sudsy dredges from off the butcher tables. You're content with the way the soapy surfaces appear to be nice and clean under what's left of the still soaking tables. Enter Karen, stage left. Karen: "Hey, can I get a ribeye cut to about 3 inches thick?" You: "No, I'm sorry, ma'am, we can't cut anything. The butchers leave at around 6 p.m., but I'm happy to—" Karen: "What do you mean you can't cut meat? Aren't you a butcher?" You: "No, ma'am, I'm the after-hours clerk, but I can take an order for you for the first thing tomorrow." Karen: "This is an outrage. Are you open right now? And is this the meat department?" You: internally: "Oh boy, here we go. Yes, ma'am, the store is open, but the meat department closes at 6 except for the pre-prepared meats and orders." Karen: "I drove from place an hour and a half away, and now you're telling me you won't cut meat even though you're open?" You preemptively: "I'm sorry, ma'am. If you would like, I can call the store manager, but the department is covered in soap. There's nothing we can do tonight." Karen: "Yes, call him right now. I want to speak to your manager." Of course. Enter store manager in suit and tie, stage right. Explanation of situation and general rudeness from Karen. Manager: "We'll get that sorted for you right away. Your name? Please get the ribeye and take it to the back." You do so, reluctantly. Cue manager with hairnet on stopping mid-stride at seeing the disassembled and soap-covered department. Manager walks back out to Karen, who is waiting, triumphantly. Manager: "I'm sorry, ma'am, we can't cut this tonight, but I can take an order for you for the first thing tomorrow." You: facepalm from out of sight. Cue slapsound.mp3. Manager and Karen argue unintelligibly as the stage darkens. So again, not only are you getting all of this from a Karen, the manager is automatically not believing you when you say that everything is closed down. Yeah, it's just hard to have to defend yourself on two fronts like that. Ugh. Story 4. Is this Karen? It felt like Karen. I used to run a childcare site for after-school care at a swanky Christian school. We also had a summer program. During the summer, we had a field trip to one of those giant arcade-type places with a pizza buffet. All the parents sent baggies full of quarters for the kids to play with. One first grader opened up another kid's backpack and took her quarters out. Both of the girls approached me, and the one said, Stacy took my quarters out of my backpack. I said, Stacy, did you take quarters out of her backpack? She nodded yes. I said, okay, I'm going to need you not to touch anyone else's backpack again for me. Your mom sent lots of quarters and they're in your backpack. You'll all have plenty to play with. Well, the policy of the organization I work with says that if you discipline a kid about anything or tell their parents about an incident, you have to write it down. I wrote like 100 of these a week. It was no big deal. They occasionally came in handy to have documented behavior to talk to parents about patterns and problem solving. Well, when I told her mom and gave her the form, she demanded that I changed the verb stole to took. She was like, I will not sign a legal document saying my child stole 8 quarters. It has to say, I'm like, okay, so I changed it. Then I get an email the next day formally requesting all copies of this form to be turned over to the parents and the document be struck from the record because she isn't confident that proper research was done and possibly her daughter never took anything to begin with. Okay, lady. So my company basically told me not to say anything and they'd contact her. She never said anything else about it again. They told me that they assured her that it was for our record keeping only and wouldn't follow her daughter in any legal sense. Story 1. Can I say me? When I was 7 years old, I promised myself I would unalive myself on my 21st birthday. So when I was 20, I did everything I wanted. I was working an awful job at Panera, and someone there told me about parties he goes to, and he invited me. I started going, and I started drinking. Eventually, I found more parties, and I started smoking. I began to hook up with as many girls as I could. Then I found my first friend with benefits. We hooked up, always without a condom, and she got pregnant. The day I found out she was pregnant, I was still confident I was going to unalive myself, so I didn't really give a care. That day I went to the local uni and I hooked up with a girl at a party. My friend with benefits aborts my kid without letting me know, and she has me jumped. It gets worse. I go into a daze of being drunk or high. I moved out into a less than desirable house. My roommates smoke and do illicit substances. My 21st birthday comes up. I have a noose ready. I go out to a party and drink a bit, but I don't get drunk. I go home, and I just fell asleep. The next day, I tripped on acid. I stayed up all night listening to the album There Is Only Now by Souls of Mischief. It blows my mind. Because of that song, I started getting myself together. Within a week, I got a second job that isn't complete junk. I applied to college and I make a 401k. I decided to start working with disabled people. I eventually got a job with them. I leave my awful job and I keep the good ones. I get a job with the disabled closer. I started there, and around that time, I started seriously dating this girl. I'm happy. Dating a girl I truly care about, working 2 jobs I love. 6 months into dating my now girlfriend, I've never been happier. She supports me, something I've never had. I just got a job working with disabled people at a local rehab center halfway house, and I'll be hosting meetings there to help the people. I don't drink nearly as much as I did. My girlfriend is happy for me. I'm happy for me. I'm also moving out of my house next week. I went down a very scary road. A lot of people that I spent time with went further down and now are addicted to Walter White crystals or H. I'm going to try to help them. I need to help them. Grats, that's amazing. That is amazing that this person was so on the brink of it and just made a 180. It was almost all thanks to an album. It's always amazing how sometimes it can just be a song or a piece of music or just an album that can really change our minds. Story 2. Same guy unbotched himself in spectacular fashion 3 times in a row. My friend was a total wannabe gangster in high school. selling illicit substances, fighting with weapons, smoking Walter White crystals, stealing cars. He dressed so thuggish that it would just attract trouble wherever we went. Case in point, he got sucker punched out of the blue at a frickin' aquarium. His hood rat butt mom, very attractive though, suddenly marries a really smart, nice guy who didn't have any money but had gone to Yale. He took my friend to Yale when they were on a vacation just to show him around. My friend is completely struck by the beauty and grandeur of the place, decides he's going to go to an Ivy League school, attends high school from the second semester of his junior year on, and gets an SAT score that got him into a good state university. Gets accepted to Harvard after his first year. Graduates, goes to an Ivy League PhD program for public health, finishes in 3.5 freaking years, then proceeds to destroy himself with pain pills as soon as he's granted an awesome job in the biotech industry. Then he goes to rehab, gets clean, gets a sales job at that same company, and breaks every sales record they had by a country mile. Within 2 years, founds his own consulting firm that organizes sales teams and blows it when he discovers H. Loses his company. Then goes back to sell biotech stuff for another company while still on H, sells spectacularly well, and switches to Suboxone. No idea how this story ends. He did just get married. His wife is a really, really hot woman from Japan. Sounds like he's still carrying that gangster inside of him, and fear of what used to be is making him be a super achiever. Unfortunately, working super hard also leads him to play super hard. Someone needs to tell him with such strong will he needs to learn to moderate himself or he'll burn himself out. I don't know if this is someone that's unbotched his life. It sounds like he's just really on the edge. He could go one way or the other. He's just really leaning on one aspect or the other. Gets really serious about school, then gets addicted, then goes on to sell real well. This last time he sold while he was addicted. I don't know if this story is going to have the happiest ending. Story 3. Took about a week. I'm currently a sophomore in high school. I have the ability to get all A's with mediocre effort, but haven't since about 4th grade, due mostly to the part where I also have the ability to be doing homework and find myself 3 chapters deep in a book that I didn't know I owned, or 15 links into a Wikipedia rabbit hole that was sparked by me looking up something related to a question I had, without ever knowing what happened in the interceding time. As of March 23rd or so, I had 3 Ds, 1 C, 1 B, and 3 A's because of classes that I couldn't fail if I literally showed up and took a nap every class period. I spent an A-B period one day asking each one of my teachers, what, if any, assignments do I have not turned in or that are correctable that I can still do for credit? Took each of their answers and wrote it down on a page of a notebook. On the next page, I then ranked them from easiest to hardest to complete. I then took every third assignment, 1, 4, 7, 10, etc., and wrote it on the next page starting down the top. Next came 2, 3, 5, 8, etc., and finally 3, 6, 9, etc. I then took them and rearranged them slightly so as to not have a giant block of one class in a row, and I had a properly sorted checklist. Now, after each assignment title, I drew 3 boxes, one column labeled Materials, Done, or Turned In. When I had the chance, I went and gathered all the materials I needed. I carried my bag around everywhere for the next week, doing backlogged assignments at any free time. On the first night, I worked straight through the night and found out that that was a bad idea. The next 3, I simply skimped on sleep. In that week, I finished 70% of the things I had been assigned over the last 6, plus all from that week. I thought it was going to expire, but obviously made it through. I understand that this wasn't exactly life-saving, but it did drastically improve the quality of the choices I have for university. I don't yet have all A's, but am well on my way to it before the end of the semester comes. Too long didn't read? I'm an idiot who doesn't finish much of my schoolwork. I spent a week doing literally nothing but and have drastically improved. I'm kind of this way. I have to have a list set out before me of all the steps that need to be done, and once I have a clear idea of how something is done, then I'm more willing to get started on something. I can understand where this person's coming from completely. Story 4. In middle school, she rejected her community and embraced the internet, living in her room glued to a computer. That probably saved her from becoming another illicit substance addict working minimum wage in her awful town with no resources or future. Gaming became her addiction instead, and that led her into realizing her town had no future and she needed to get out. Ironically, becoming an internet addict shut-in unbotched up her life since she made friends on the internet with education and life experiences who coached her through the college app process and how to get out of bumduck nowhere. So she learned about SATs, got into college, applied for scholarships, and now lives in a city with a better job and a better life. Still addicted to games, though. Kind of similar to me, except from early childhood up, 6 and 7 years old, I was already a nerd and introvert, always just on my computer, or my mom's computer at the time. I grew up in the type of area where you're either a nerd or you're a drunk, so I guess I'm lucky to be who I am now. But then again, my entire family is nerds, so chances of me becoming one too was big. My life because of it. Story 1. Being a cop in a small town, I would get a few large parties, 150 plus kids, with a lot of kids coming from outlying areas. I'm generally pretty nice to the young adults who live in the area I police and am generally well liked. But to the kids who come from different towns to party, well, they obviously don't know or like me. Anyhow, this one party I pull up and start walking around, turning a little bit of a blind eye to the underage drinking. I talk to the homeowner's son, parents away, and just ask him to try and get rid of some people and move the party indoors and close the windows as there have been too many neighbor complaints. He says he'll do what he can. All nice and cordial. Anyhow, this one punk standing there with a Lucky beer in his hand starts mouthing me off and bragging to his buddies. Just average junk like, "Hey pig, eat any donuts yet?" And just generally swearing and saying how I don't do junk about how I can't do junk about what he's saying, and that I can't arrest him for dip as he's on private property. Dip, drunk in public place. I don't give him any satisfaction or acknowledgement. I have thick skin, else I wouldn't be a cop. But I had other calls to attend to, so I left. No further complaints from the party, as the homeowner asked many people to leave. A few hours later, I'm driving back to the office, donut-free, and pull over a car doing 15 kilometers an hour over the limit on the highway. Usually I give cars at least 20 kilometers per hour on the highway before pulling them over, as well that's what I normally do on the highway, and wouldn't be right to give people tickets for something I do all the time. Well, it's the jerkwad driving who's been mouthing me off. Amazing how nice he was to me at this point in time. Complete attitude change. I didn't let him know that I remembered him from the party, and I now had his name and vehicle plate so I could always look out for him in the future. Long story short, he got tickets for speeding, only having one active headlight, failure to display an N sign, new driver law here, and on the rear of the vehicle lets other drivers know this person just got his license. Having more than one non-family member passenger, another new driver law, and not wearing a seatbelt. As I remembered him drinking, I also demanded a roadside breathalyzer test. He wasn't drunk, but had some alcohol in his system. So I also gave him a 24-hour roadside probation from driving and towed his vehicle. I slept well that night. Also, 3 months later, after running his license on our system, the insurance company had prohibited him from driving for 3 months. Just karma. As much as a lot of people don't trust the cops, this one seems like he's got his head on straight and knows his community well. Just amazing what happens. Just amazing. Glad this one came through the way it did. Story 2. I was sitting in my car taking some photos with my new smartphone while using different settings. Then there was this woman who just stopped at a one-way street with only one lane. She stands there for like 10 seconds doing nothing, and I thought that was very unusual, so I started to make a video. Another driver comes and honks. She then proceeds to reverse and hit the car of the other guy with her big BMW. 4 guys jumped out of the BMW and started yelling at the guy. You have to know, in Germany, the one who hits another car from behind will always be blamed if he can't prove that it wasn't his fault. So we have a classic insurance fraud. The poor guy at the back was really worried because he knew he couldn't prove it. I just sat there in my car and waited for the police. Then I went outside and the police started to get the stories. Of course, there were 4 against 1 guy. I just stood there and listened to the woman complaining about how this idiot hit her from behind and her brand new car is now damaged. After the police took the statement from both sides and even took my statement, they said there is no chance that 2 versus 4 could prove that he didn't do it. 2 of the guys at the BMW said they didn't know the girl and were pedestrians who saw it. That would increase the credibility. So they made all false statements to the police, and exactly that's the thing I wanted to happen. I then told the police, "Oh wait, there's just one thing," like Columbo style, and said that I got a video of what happened. I showed them to the police, and the woman and the drivers just stood there with their mouths open. You could not only see how she hit his car, but also that the pedestrians were with the woman in the car. Then the guy hugged me and we became good friends. Turns out he lives near me and we spent the evening drinking and gaming. Sorry for my bad English in German. Beautiful. Man, that is amazing. Always have a dash cam. Always get a dash cam because many people are trying to run something. And 2, it was great for him to just sit there and listen to these people act and lie their faces off and then just spring this thing on them. Amazing. Story 3. I'm a manager at a grocery store, so I get awesomely rude customers on a daily basis. Every Wednesday is senior discount day. You have to be 55 to 60 to qualify for the discount. Needless to say, Wednesdays are intense. Lots of seniors and lots of other people who don't want to deal with the seniors. I don't generally mind the old folks. Most of them are pretty cool and have some interesting stories and cute jokes. This Wednesday, there was one particular customer who was being a huge pain in the butt from the moment she walked in. She was tall, blonde, high heels, very made up, and dressed to the nines. She was probably late 30s to early 40s. She came storming up to customer service. "There are no parking spots. This is ridiculous. I'm going to request that you expand your parking lot since you don't seem to have the initiative to request that yourself." Off to a great start, lady. She comes back storming back up about 45 minutes later. "I'm in a huge hurry, and every line has someone in it. I need to check out here." We had 3 lines open, and each one had one single customer. One. I say, "No problem, but I'll get you at a checkout. We have too many items to get here." She has a huge hissy fit. "I don't have time for this. Let's go." As I'm checking her out, it is constant whining. "You have only one brand of makeup? That's ridiculous. I only wear MAC, but I was going to settle for Revlon, but you don't even have that. Now I have to make a whole separate trip. Please don't put my bread on top of my eggs. The eggs could roll over and crush the bread. Please, bag my avocados separately. I need to use those for a face mask tonight. They need to be perfect. I have a photo session for work tomorrow. I'm in a magazine." She was unbelievable. Finally, at the end, I had enough. As she's about to pay, I say, "Don't forget, today is senior discount day. You got 5% off." She just stared at me. "What?" I smiled broadly. Every Wednesday, senior citizens get 5% off their bill. I'll go ahead and take it off. You are 55 to 60, right? She's staring at me, debit card in hand, cheeks getting red. I lose my smile slowly and say, "Oh, you don't qualify? Sorry about that. Maybe next year. Thanks for your honesty." I haven't seen her in the store since. Just amazing. That's thinking on your feet. I mean, apparently he saw the chink in the armor and just went for it and just hit the bullseye. Just hit the target straight on. Amazing. Story 4. I was working as a shift leader in a Dunkin' Donuts. Spent 2 years in that hellhole and dealt with my fair share of rude buttholes. One particularly memorable day, a group of ladies came in during our busiest hour, just past noon. The line was almost out the door and we were short-staffed, so it was pretty hectic. While they were ordering, one of them asked for a job application and started filling it out on the counter. She handed it back before they were done ordering, and I stashed it on a shelf under the register and started making their food. They had a huge order, and we did our best to get it out quickly, but it was obvious from the looks on their faces that we just weren't quick enough for their liking. They sat down to eat their food, and the girl who just turned in her application got back in line. I spotted her right away. She was standing with a glaring face, crossing her arms and tapping her foot, trying her best to look obviously, almost cartoonishly ticked off. So I motioned for her to come up to the counter since I knew she had a complaint and I wanted to get it fixed right away. I assumed that in the shuffle we had messed up her sandwich or something like that. Anyone who's worked in fast food knows that these things happen when it's chaotic. I asked her what was wrong, and she pointed to her bottled Mountain Dew and barked, definitely not an indoor voice, "This is flat!" It was a bit accusing, as though it were my fault that the bottle of soda she just opened was flat. So I took it and told her to get another one out of the cooler, then check it to make sure it was good. After all that, she asked for a refund. I said, as politely as I could, "Ma'am, I replaced your soda. Sorry if there was an inconvenience, but I don't think a refund should be necessary." Something like that, I don't remember my exact words. So she stormed, ticked off, back to her table, and started complaining loudly to her group about not getting a refund. So, since I was having an awful day anyway and really could not see a shrew like this ever working for us, I grabbed her application from the register, walked it over to the lobby trash can nearest her table, crumpled it up, and threw it away as she watched. The look on her face was freaking priceless. Too long didn't read? Lady comes in to order food and fill out a job application, is a total shrew. I throw the application in the trash while she watches. Story 1. 2 I can recall. One specific. The specific one was a young girl around teenage years who decided those toddler swings with the seat you stick their legs through like a little basket so they can't fall out was made for a teenage girl. She got stuck and lost blood flow to her legs. We had to cut her down and get her to a hospital to have it safely removed due to it basically becoming a tourniquet on both her legs. The other is general, but it's people who didn't wear a seatbelt and the people they unalived as a result. You have less control of a vehicle when you're not being held in place, so those wrecks are more common as the first sign of trouble, your butt moves in the seat and reduces your ability to control the vehicle. You also become a projectile. If you're lucky, you only unalive yourself. If you're not, you wind up bouncing around and unaliving a passenger. Also, the leading cause of partial ejections and re-entry to vehicles, since nothing was holding them to the seats. So many times I could have just been there cutting someone out of a seat and them being barely beat up, but instead they had been scalped and perished or hit their kid or spouse or other family member or friend and unalived them. One in particular I remember was a large man not wearing a seatbelt in an overturned truck. He woke up while we were working on him cutting the passenger's side up to get down to him as the vehicle was on its driver's side down. He kept asking us how his son was. At first, we didn't get it. Then we realized he was laying on his 15 to 16-year-old son, and due to the man's size, we didn't see him. The son was wearing a seatbelt, but he perished because his father smashed into him and smothered him to perishing while we worked rather than just wear a seatbelt extender so his seatbelt fit. Also, don't lie to us about if he wore it. Your seatbelt won't fire the pre-tensioners if they're not engaged in the slot. They're designed that way. This is a circuit that is completed by the best being clicked in place, which is also how your car knows your passengers are wearing a seatbelt or not, and sets off that obnoxious alarm. There's also a sensor in the passenger front seat of most modern vehicles to detect the weight of a small person, which is why your sodas or pizzas or whatever set off the alarm. Just wear the dang seatbelt and don't lie. If you are wearing it, I won't be able to pull tons of slack on it when I arrive. Guess what goes in the report as the determining factor your insurance sees as to if you should have your medical covered as a result of an accident? Yep. I don't know what they do with their information, but I have to write it in the report. Source: State Vehicle Rescue Technician and Firefighter, mostly volunteer at this point. There was a horrifying but effective seatbelt advert when I was a kid, 90s England, that basically went, "Today, Joe unalived his mum, then sat back down, with the kid sitting in the back unbelted and smashing into the driver's seat." Turned me into one of those kids who would nag everyone about their seatbelts. But I've been in a couple of crashes since and walked away. That was one of the big things when I was driving rideshare. I had to make sure that everyone had their seatbelt on, otherwise insurance would not be covered on that ride. And heaven forbid, if there was any sort of accident, that everybody would be accounted for, just out of pure monetary responsibility alone, but just also for everyone's life safety. Story 2. I'm not a firefighter, but my brother's wife at the time was. There was this massive structure fire at a barn in town that drew out nearly every truck in the general area, like 3 tons worth of firefighters trying to get the thing under control. During all of this, there was some lady who continuously called 911 asking over and over again, "What's going on at the farm up the road?" According to her, this woman would have to be a complete moron to not realize what was going on, as the fire could be seen for miles. Fast forward later into the night, and one of the ambulances on scene suddenly leaves. Obviously not normal for this sort of situation, but there isn't much time to question it. Fast forward still, as things are finally starting to calm down and are under control, one of the volunteers on the original ambulance comes over in his car and shuffles sheepishly over to her and the chief of their department. He tells them that there's a woman a little ways down the road who called the ambulance, hence why they left, and requires a lift assist, but absolutely refuses to let the EMTs do it. No, it has to be a firefighter. My brother's wife, seeing that the other departments have things under control, goes with the man to see what's up. Apparently, it was the same woman who had called 911 over and over again, and when they arrived, she was lying on the floor absolutely wailing. EMTs say they can't find anything wrong from what they've been able to do, but with a requested firefighter, they are finally able to get this woman up. They start asking her what happened, hoping she might be more willing to share with my brother's wife there, and she says, "I was just feeling a little ignored. I figured this would get your attention." Grown woman just laid herself on the floor, called for help, insisted on a firefighter when there was no need, all because the barn fire was getting way more attention than she was, and the 911 operators wouldn't give her gossip about what was going on. I know she got in major trouble for abusing 911, but from what I hear from the people on both fire and ambulance, she has made a habit of calling for help whenever she feels she's not getting enough attention. She sounds like the type of woman who would fake a seizure in public. Actually, no. She sounds like the type of woman who would fake a seizure in public because someone else was in the process of actually seizing and she was jealous of the attention. This reminds me of that South Park episode where Cartman attends a birthday party, and whenever the birthday person gets a present, he gets a present as well, because everyone's afraid of what he's going to do if he doesn't get what he wants. This is really dangerous. I wonder what kind of action was taken with this woman, if any. How do you solve a problem like that? What do you think? Story 3. Years ago, we had this call straight out of Caddyshack. Some guy had gotten tired of this gopher ruining his yard. Little did he know, though, he was facing the Sun Tzu of gophers. The homeowner, dwelling upon his experience from Vietnam, decided that the best way to deal with the gopher was to treat the situation like a VC tunnel. In lieu of a frag grenade, he poured a 5-gallon can of gasoline down the gopher hole, waited with a varmint gun, and lit it off. The ensuing explosion caused a small crater to form in his yard. I'm still thoroughly impressed that there was a proper fuel-to-air ratio in the network of tunnels that allowed for such an explosion to happen. However, the gopher refused to surrender without a fight. The gopher ran out of the hole engulfed in flames, causing the guy's yard to catch on fire. The gopher sprinted into the guy's shed, still on fire, and burrowed into a void space in the wall where he perished. Like the martyr perk from Modern Warfare, his still flaming remains set the inside of the wall on fire, as well as several flammables. In the end, the guy's backyard was ruined and about a quarter of his shed burned down, taking out a bunch of power tools and a zero-turn mower. He definitely would have saved a few $1,000s if he had hired an exterminator. This reminds me of my dad. He hated fire ants, always had gasoline around to clean the grease, you know. Well, he would get bit by an ant and the fight was on. Gasoline was fetched and poured onto the mound, promptly lit, and the ensuing commentary delivered, deadpan, "I'll show them ants fire." The gopher one is like if they did an actual epic sequel to Caddyshack, and the gopher just decided his contract was up and decided he went out in a literal blaze of glory. And man, just taking out everything. This guy was just really forced by this gopher to face the consequences of his actions. Wow. Story 1. It's actually a shared experience between me, 2 of my aunts, and my sister. It happened when I was 11. My aunt was visiting our house. I lived with my mom, my other aunt, and my 2 sisters. Both my aunts were talking and catching up, and her son, my 6-month-old cousin, was getting fussy. I offered to take him and brought him back to my room to lay him on the bed and play with him. He was fine for a while, but got fussy again, so I went to take him back to his mother. In the hallway closet, on the way out to the living room and kitchen, was our washer-dryer. Someone had taken out clothes from the dryer and left the basket in front of it during the time I was in my room. I ended up tripping on the basket, and my cousin fell out of my arms and into the air. This all happened in slow motion for me, but I remember catching myself, leaping forward, and catching my cousin just before hitting the floor like he was a damn football. Suddenly, it's really quiet. My youngest sister was staring from the living room couch, and my aunts were staring, jaws dropped at the kitchen table. He starts screaming, and my aunt rushes over to pick him up and keeps thanking me and laughing hysterically out of nervousness, confusion, and probably just the situation in general. We've told this story to my cousin years later, and he just doesn't believe us. We haven't shared it since, but my aunt made a joke about it when I was holding my own child and tripped a little over an area rug. "You're clumsy, but I know you won't let that kid hit the floor." I mean, this cousin was 6 months old when this story happened. how is he going to remember it? I mean, unless he subconsciously has some sort of affinity for roller coasters or something like that. I wonder if this happened in the time when taking video on your cell phone was a thing, or when cell phones were a thing. It would be nice to have proof just to show him. Story 2. Got a knife put to my throat as a joke once when I was little and decided to go play outside on my own. Only told my parents years later because I didn't want them to worry. Weird child logic looking back at it. I got hit by a car when I was about 8, and I was genuinely more worried about my family finding out than I was about being hurt. The guy that hit me knew my family, and word got round to them eventually. Since I pretty much ran off after I got up from the ground and said some incoherent things, he was still worried sick about me and tried to find out how I was. I was right to fear their reaction and got a good beating out of it. Edit because there seems to be some confusion. Not a joke. My family beat me because I was a dummy for getting hit by a car. The same family that said it was my fault for getting physically violated as a kid and that just shrugged when my brother tried to unalive me. Everything was perpetually my fault. It's like that Parks and Rec scene. You go to jail? I drop a plate? I get a beating. Someone else drops a plate? I get a beating. Also, not Slavic, Moroccan. But not all Moroccans are like my family. The guy that hit me was also Moroccan, and he was worried sick about me. That is awful. I mean, that is just really bad. Why would you get a beating for something that someone else did? What if it was completely not this person's fault, and this person actually observed all of the signs for crossing the street? Maybe, what if it was at a crosswalk and it was on the green and they saw it on the green and the car came anyway? If they saw it, would they still beat him for getting hit by a car? Weird. Story 3. Once as a landlord, I had to break up an 18-person multi-person spicy party. We had noise complaints, which were common, went to check the room to check on things, and things were odd. They would barely open the door to speak to me. They had the weirdest assembly of clothing on, and there was this weird salty-smelling fog in the room. Finally, just for documentation's sake, I had to have them sign my report, and they said, "Do you want all of us to sign?" I said, "What?" They turned on the lights, and in the middle of the floor was a giant pile of naked butts. We're talking about every gender, every position, a clown, a midget, a toilet seat, all in one big pile gyrating. My presence wasn't going to stop the party. I then looked up at the TV, and they had a gigantic 80-plus inch TV, super high def, playing the most explicit corn I've ever seen. I mean, you could see razor burn. I had to shut down the party because the buildings were awful, and there was an occupancy limit in each room. You could only have 7 people in at a time, and they were over quota. All at once, like 15 angry naked people got up and started storming out of the room in various degrees of nakedness. I had to return to my office to write a report up, and we were told to be as explicit as possible. So I included the razor burn, the sloppy ham smack sounds, everything. I got a call in the morning from the female manager going, "Yeah, we don't need that much detail. You're in trouble. The owner wants to speak with you." So she put on the elderly male owner, and he exclaimed, "That was the best story I've ever read. Please write more." So wait, does that mean that the male owner thought that this guy was just practicing his fan fiction writing skills on this thing, and that, or did he actually believe it? Did he actually believe the story and wanted more? I mean, in that case, if he actually believed the story was possible, that would mean that this guy would actually have to let more people have multi-person spicy parties in there just so he has more material. Kind of a catch-22 there. Story 4. I went with a friend to a weekend party in a mansion. I knew he was sort of sketchy, dealing illicit substances and so. We came to the mansion, and I didn't really think there was anything strange going on. As the event went on, we were all going to the sauna, and there, the illicit substances came out. These people were Lithuanian, and I didn't understand what they were saying, but when I really didn't want to do Peruvian marching powder, I could feel how the tension in the room went sour. My friend, who also was Lithuanian, spoke with him for what felt like hours when the lines of powder were just lying in front of me. After a while, everyone started smiling. He had told them I was too big of a wussy to do any illicit substances with criminals and was just a softie from Scandinavia. After that, things calmed down and we went to bed at around 3. At 4, I was woken up by my friend who just screamed at me to get in the car. On the way out to the car, I saw some people carrying a giant rug into the trunk of a car. I later learned that a guy had OD'd and he was in the rug. The people he had invited me to party with were the Lithuanian mafia. Didn't really feel comfortable hanging around with him later when I learned that his friends that could drop by his apartment now and then were actually part of organized crime. Story 5. This happened 8 years ago. I, 10 years old, was walking my dog down the street with my father, and my dog decided to take a pee on the car wheel of a Mercedes-Benz. A couple minutes later, that exact Mercedes-Benz slowly drives past us and then U-turns around and slowly drives past us again. This time, he opens his window and shouts, "Curse you!" to us multiple times without explanation. After cursing at us for like a minute straight, he speeds off back into the neighborhood, so we just continue on our walk. As soon as we get back into our street, we see the man walking towards us and pull out a gun. He aims at us and shouts, "Your dog pee on my wheel," over and over again. Of course, my dad gets very angry and shouts back at him, "Do you think this is the freaking Wild West?" He then starts shooting at us, but misses completely. Then my dad sprints at him and manages to tackle him to the ground. I go and get my mother and we call the police. Meanwhile, my dad still has this guy pinned down. The police come and take the guy away, and we then find out that he was a big Chinese illicit substance dealer in the area. So this is basically the story of how my dad took down a Chinese gangster whilst unarmed. Story 1. I did desktop support for a medical imaging company. All of the transcriptionists work at home, so I would often have to go into their homes to support their desktops. One time, a woman called into the help desk because her computer was making a weird noise and smelled like something was burning, so I was dispatched to her house, and when I walked in, the house was, to put it lightly, in disarray. I went into her office, afraid to touch anything, and there was her desk amongst various dirty dishes, takeout boxes, pizza boxes. I go under her desk and unplug her desktop and go to open it, and I see cockroaches scurry out from inside the desktop. I don't mean a couple. I mean hundreds. I jump back and swipe one that managed to start up my pants leg, and there's a swarm of dong roaches pouring out of this desktop. I leave the house and immediately call my supervisor and tell him what I found, and tell him that I refuse to go back into that house. I walk to my car and I'm totally booked out. I strip down naked next to my car, I'm not kidding, and put my clothes in the trunk. I drive directly to my house and pull into the back. I toss my clothes into the garbage, including my shoes. I hosed myself down in the backyard, went immediately into my bathroom from there, and took the hottest shower I have ever taken. The next day, my boss pulled me into the office to write me up for not finishing my day in the office, and I immediately asked for an HR rep. When the HR rep got there, I explained what happened, and the HR rep told me that it would be in the best interest to not write me up because I could sue and probably win. I left that job a month later. The only thing I would have done differently is I'd have burned the clothes. I was thinking that too. I work with computers. I have dust blowers. I blow out those computers every week. I don't want it. I've never had anything like this happening to me, and I never hope to. And that person should definitely have taken pictures, because that way he'd also have proof. Story 2. Quite a while back, I used to install high-end entertainment systems, home theaters, and distributed audio for people who didn't know what to do with their money. Smallest house we ever worked on was a 7,500 square feet. My boss called me in to do a distributed audio and cascade lighting system in a new construction. We spent about an hour with the client, nice guy, building a 14K square foot house. First floor was your typical rich person's place. Library, study, game room, great room labeled ballroom, and dining room. Up the hill slightly was the second level, kind of staring up the slope. 3 suites and a 6-bedroom attached guest house. Down the slope on the way to the shore of the lake, it was a gym, a kitchen, a theater, and then a room labeled special. I'm like, eh? He had very specific requirements for special. Very, very high-end hidden speakers, a screen that came out of a hidden ceiling pocket, multimedia projector in a hidden pocket in the rear. Mind you, this was a while ago, so this stuff was very, very expensive. We do the job, things work, and in my mind, special means multi-person spicy room or something. About 6 months after he moved into the place, I got a call for tech support. Since the hidden pockets were a custom job, I figured that was it. Turns out it was a burnt bulb on the projector, and I discovered what special was. It was a chapel with a 1-person pew in front of an absolute shrine, Orthodox icons on every surface of the walls, shelves around the room with relics, like illegal relics, like human remains transported internationally relics, Christian antiques, by my masters in religion no less than 500 to 1,300 years old. I'm very secretive about this. Please don't let anyone know I have it. Oh, I told people. I didn't tell anyone his name, and I won't, because outwardly he's a nice, giving, charitable man. But that room weirded me out massively. And this guy was in the right place at the right time, being a master's in religion, to look at this place so he could pinpoint the date. That's impressive. But yeah, when you think a special room in a rich person's house, you don't think chapel. You don't think that like this. And if he had all of this stuff in the room, what was he doing with the projection screen? Was he just playing Indiana Jones on repeat? Story 3. I am a journeyman house painter by trade, and I've been self-employed in the profession for over 20 years now. About 10 years ago, I was going to paint an older woman's home. She was probably 75. I was painting the kitchen and the attached small family dining area. All of the furniture was moved, carpets were out, pictures off the walls. This place was ready for paint. I always start by removing the faceplates from outlets and switches. First one, just 2 screws. Pulled the plate off and found the outlet full of termites. Packed. Unalive, thankfully. But this was an indication of something bigger happening here. I went and asked the woman about it, and once she saw it, she called her representative at ABC Pest Company to come over immediately. After explaining the situation, he was quickly on his way. I went to standby mode. I wasn't going to paint anything if the house was coming down. Luckily, the client had purchased the paint and she was going to pay me by the hour. The project I was going to be painting was going to take me about 5 hours total, $125. Well, the pest guy looked all around the house, pulled a few more outlet covers off with the same results, all packed with unalive insects. He then changed into full coveralls and climbed under the house. He was only there for a few minutes, maybe 3. Out he comes and declares the house a total loss. The floorboards, he said, were hanging on by a thread. The walls were all soft and about to be pushed over. The entire house could collapse at any moment. I packed my tools and said my goodbyes. I told her not to worry about paying me for my time. I'd been there for about an hour. She had much bigger problems to deal with. That was really kind of you. Oh, just for a paint job, you discover that this house is just going to collapse. I guess it's not worth just putting a pretty face. He would be literally putting a pretty face on an awful problem. Hope this 75-year-old woman found a place to live after that, or found some other accommodations. She might even still be able to sell the house if someone is really into DIY. Story 4. I did apartment maintenance for a while. We started quarterly inspections, and the first day we opened a door, and the smell that came out was indescribable. The man who was with me was ex-military, and he said that we were about to find a body. In the maintenance community, this tends not to be a matter of if you ever find a body, but when. He told me that he would go in alone if I was uncomfortable with it, but I went in too. We didn't find a body, but we found a mountain of trash that took up the entire dining area, and honestly, just trash, mostly food packaging everywhere, and that accounted for a lot of the smell. We also found a dog, a very sweet golden retriever that was starved for attention. It was obviously being left to just pee and poo all through the unit. It probably hadn't been outside in weeks based on the smell and general condition of the unit. We went outside, locked up, and called the property manager for her to come by. While we were waiting, he came home. The look on his face when he saw us was terrifying. The manager talked to him, and they set a plan about cleanup and gave a time frame for him to get the unit back to regular. The other maintenance guy stayed with him for a while that evening. When we left the unit, he was sure that the guy would unalive himself that night. Turns out the renter had recently gone through a very rough divorce where his children had been removed from him with very little warning, and he was spiraling. I left the company before I learned how it all ended. I hope he's doing better. Poor guy. I hope he got through it as well. Story 5. My boyfriend is a locksmith. During the 2008 recession, Las Vegas had hundreds and thousands of homes that were getting repoed or abandoned. The company he worked for would have him go and change the locks to keep people out, and usually this happened in the middle of the night to limit the possibilities of running into ex-owners of the properties. I sometimes tagged along, mostly to explore some of the ridiculously big houses that people had just left, but helped some of the time. This one house looked totally normal from the outside. You couldn't tell any difference from any of the other cookie-cutter planned development homes. But inside, in every room, there were those timeout dolls. If you've never seen them, they're a doll that stands against the wall with its hand up to its face, and even more creepy, usually they have no face, but they look like a kid hiding their face and pouting after being put in a timeout. When I say they were in every room, I mean every single room. And not just one, but dozens, lining the walls. Not laying down, but standing up against every wall in the house. The house's electricity had been shut off, so all we had was flashlights. Walking into each room, it did not get less creepy seeing doll after doll. He's already afraid of dolls, and this made it so much worse. Altogether, we counted 63, but there might have been more. And now I know what I'm doing if I ever get evicted. Story 6 was a carrier for the post office. When you first start, you only have one route 1 day a week. Every other day, you cover for someone who calls in sick or is on vacation or something like that. So one day, I covered for a different carrier who was sick. I get to one house, and they have 4 packages. On the front door, there was a sign that said, "Please don't knock or ring. Just open the door and leave the packages behind the door." So I'm like, okay, this is weird, but whatever. It must happen a lot because the sign was old and dusty. So I open the door and go into the house. It's normal. I bend down to put the packages down neatly. As I rose back up, there was this old dude who had to be like 60 or 70 just standing there in tight-butt jeans, tight-butt tank top, with a clearly dyed jet black mustache drinking beer out of a can with a straw. I naturally got scared for a second, so I told him, "Sorry, you scared me. I didn't see you there." And he just says, "That's 'cause I wasn't here." So I just say, "Well, I'm sorry," and start to leave. And he says, "Hold up, where's so-and-so?" I say, "Oh, she's sick, so I'll be covering for her today and possibly tomorrow." And his words verbatim were, "Nice. Maybe she should stay sick a while. I'll make sure to wear something cute tomorrow." I fake laugh and got the heck up out of there. The most disturbing part about this is the fact he was drinking beer with a straw. The guy probably has a few postal workers buried in his backyard. Were any of you following along with this story and thinking Herbert from Family Guy? I almost read it in that voice. "Oh, well, I'm sorry." "Oh, maybe she should stay sick for a while. I'll make sure to wear something cute tomorrow." Oh, and now I'm realizing that voice just sounds like a very creepy version of Mickey Mouse.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.